Long before modern economists coined the term inflation, long before Wall Street analysts studied money supply and central banks adjusted interest rates, the Roman Empire, the most powerful superpower the world had ever seen, stumbled into one of the most destructive and far-reaching financial forces in human history, not through grand strategy or economic genius, but through a series of desperate decisions, political pressures, military crises, and short-term fixes that spiraled into a long-term disaster. This is the story of how Rome, the empire that conquered the world, accidentally invented inflation, and in doing so, gave us one of the most important economic lessons of all time, that even the mightiest civilization can collapse when it forgets the value of its own money. To understand how this happened, we need to step back into the glory of Rome at its peak. Imagine a vast empire stretching from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria, a world stitched together with immaculate roads, bustling markets, elegant villas, mighty legions, and an administrative machine unlike anything seen before. Rome's economy was powered by trade, agriculture, slavery, and most importantly, money. The Roman silver denarius, stamped with the emperor's face, was one of the most stable and trusted currencies in the ancient world. For centuries, it contained roughly 95% pure silver, and that consistency built the empire's financial foundation. Soldiers trusted it. Merchants trusted it. Foreign kingdoms accepted it. Rome's money was Rome's power. But empires are expensive. Rome had borders thousands of miles long, surrounded by tribes and rival powers that constantly probed for weakness. The legions, Rome's muscle, prestige, and lifeline, needed to be paid. Roads, aqueducts, grain supplies, public games, marble monuments, and an ever-growing bureaucracy required staggering sums of money. As Rome expanded, wars brought wealth, gold, silver, slaves, and tribute poured into the capital. Conquest funded conquest. But expansion cannot last forever. Eventually, the empire reached its geographical limits, and the flow of war booty slowed. The expenses, however, did not. The emperors still needed money to pay soldiers, feed citizens, build monuments, and maintain political support. Without endless conquest, they had only three options: raise taxes, borrow money, or manipulate the currency. Raising taxes was dangerous. Heavily taxed citizens revolt, and emperors who angered taxpayers often had short reigns. Borrowing was possible but limited. Rome didn't have modern bonds or a central bank. So emperors turned to the third option, changing the money itself. And this is where everything began to unravel. Instead of collecting more silver, they simply used less of it. This process is called debasement, and Rome invented economic debasement on an imperial scale. The logic was simple. If one silver denarius contained 95% silver, then 10 denarii required a relatively large amount of silver metal. But if you melt down that same amount of silver and mix it with cheaper metals like copper, suddenly you can mint many more coins with the same amount of silver. It was the ancient world's version of printing money. The coins looked the same, bore the emperor's image, and held the same official value, but their actual metal content, their real worth, quietly shrank. The first major debaser was Emperor Nero. Known for extravagance, corruption, and an obsession with luxury, Nero reduced the purity of the denarius subtly, believing no one would notice. And indeed, most ordinary Romans did not. But once the seal was broken, once a Roman emperor decided that changing the money was easier than changing policy, the temptation became irresistible. Nero's successors reduced purity even further. What began as a 10% reduction in silver content under Nero became a steady downward slide over the following centuries. By the time of the Severan dynasty, Rome was in crisis. The empire faced external invasions, internal rebellions, plagues, and soaring military costs. Emperors rose and fell rapidly. Each new ruler, desperate to pay the legions and secure loyalty, minted more coins by reducing silver content. Some emperors debased the currency so rapidly that the denarius became almost unrecognizable. As debasement accelerated, prices rose. A loaf of bread cost twice as much, then 5 times as much, then 10. Soldiers demanded higher pay because their wages bought less. Merchants raised prices because coins contained less silver. Tax collectors demanded more coins for the same tax, pushing farmers into poverty. Inflation spread across the empire like a slow-burning fire. At first, only the educated elite understood what was happening. Then merchants caught on. Then ordinary citizens. Panic followed. People began hoarding older, higher silver coins. New coins were accepted reluctantly or discounted. Trust, the invisible foundation of all money, cracked. By the 3rd century, Rome entered what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year period of chaos marked by 26 emperors, civil wars, invasions, and economic collapse. The denarius, once a rock of stability, had become nearly worthless. Some coins contained less than 2% silver, a shiny copper disc with a thin silver coating. Inflation turned into hyperinflation. Prices doubled in months. Farmers abandoned their land. Trade shrank. Cities depopulated. The Roman market economy, once the envy of the world, imploded. Enter Emperor Diocletian, a reformer who understood that the empire could not survive without fixing the money. In 301 AD, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, one of the most ambitious and misguided economic regulations in history. It attempted to control inflation by freezing wages and setting maximum prices for thousands of goods: grain, meat, clothing, transport, even labor. The punishment for violating these price controls? Death. But basic economics cannot be overruled by law. Sellers refused to supply goods at artificially low prices. Markets moved underground. Black markets exploded. Diocletian's attempt to legislate prices not only failed but pushed inflation higher because people lost even more trust in the currency. After years of struggling, Diocletian admitted defeat. His reforms collapsed, and the economy remained shattered. But Rome had one last emperor who understood money better than any before him: Constantine. Recognizing the denarius was beyond saving, he introduced a new gold coin, the solidus, with strict purity and weight standards. The solidus was stable, reliable, and accepted across the Mediterranean. It became the backbone of Byzantine and European trade for nearly 800 years. The gold standard saved what remained of the empire. But the broader Roman economy never recovered. The damage caused by centuries of inflation and currency manipulation contributed to Rome's long decline. Roads deteriorated. Armies shrank. Tax bases collapsed. Local economies broke away. And as the empire fractured, so did its influence. Rome didn't fall in a single day or from a single cause. But inflation, the empire's own accidental invention, played a central role in eroding its economic strength, hollowing out its middle class, bankrupting its farmers, corrupting its markets, and destabilizing its politics. Inflation made Rome weaker, more vulnerable, and less capable of responding to the challenges that eventually overwhelmed it. And the most tragic part? Rome didn't set out to invent inflation. It simply resorted to short-term fixes that created long-term consequences. A little debasement seemed harmless. A few more coins seemed convenient. Each emperor believed he could kick the problem down the road. But small decisions accumulated into an economic avalanche. Looking back, Rome teaches us that money is not just metal or paper or numbers. Money is trust, and once trust breaks, the consequences ripple through every part of society. Inflation is not just an economic issue. It is a political issue, a social issue, a moral issue. It affects how people work, trade, save, invest, and plan for the future. It shapes confidence in leaders and institutions. And it is astonishing that the earliest large-scale inflation crisis in human history still mirrors the patterns we see today, from modern currency printing to debt crises to political short-termism. Rome accidentally invented inflation because it forgot a simple truth: you cannot create wealth by creating currency. Real wealth comes from production, from farms, workshops, trade routes, innovation, and human effort. Rome tried to solve economic problems with political solutions, financial shortcuts, and monetary manipulation. And the result was one of the greatest economic cautionary tales of all time. The story of Roman inflation is not ancient. It is eternal. It is a reminder that even the greatest civilization in history can collapse when its leaders prioritize convenience over sustainability. When short-term necessity blinds long-term wisdom. When money becomes an illusion rather than a measure of value. And perhaps most importantly, when a society forgets that trust in its rulers, its economy, and its currency is more valuable than gold.